Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 New Hampshire Senate election. This has the potential to be one of the closest Senate races in the 2022 election cycle, along with states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. I think the midterms are going to come down to those 5 states most of all, which are really going to determine whether or not Republicans take back the Senate, Democrats hold a majority, or they actually gain in the Senate. All those outcomes are possible. It really just depends on what type of midterm we're going to have going into next year. And as of right now, I guess it can be presumed that Republicans are going to be favored. Presumably, since Joe Biden is in the White House, the Democrats have a trifecta. The last time Democrats had a trifecta in the federal government was back in 2008. And of course, in 2010, the Republicans swept back control of the House, winning one of the largest House victories in an election in U.S. history. So that certainly is possible, although I think it is less likely that this is going to be some sort of red wave in the House. But we're here to focus on the Senate, of course. If we look at the 2022 Senate election here in New Hampshire, of course, Maggie Hassan is running for a second term. She's also the former governor of New Hampshire, which propelled her to her Senate seat in the first place back in the 2016 election. In terms of Republican challengers, the only declared challenger is a guy by the name of Donald Baldock, who is a U.S. Army Special Forces Brigadier General. He ran back in 2020 and actually lost the primary. We can pull up that race now. And Jeanne Shaheen went on to win by over 15 points. So I guess for his sake, it's probably better that he lost the primary. But the last Senate election in New Hampshire was a complete blowout for incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She won by a safe margin. She also won every single county in the entire state. Presidentially, that was not the case in New Hampshire. New Hampshire went to Joe Biden. Went to Joe Biden by around 7 points or so. But what I think is really fascinating about New Hampshire is while Joe Biden won the presidency by around 7. Jeanne Shaheen wins by around 15. Incumbent Republican Governor Chris Sununu wins by over 32 points. And the Republicans in the statewide elections take back the state Senate and the state House, albeit small majorities, but still majorities in both chambers, which is remarkable considering that last time around, both of these chambers were occupied by Democrats. The reason why I think this is important is because New Hampshire is a state that is, like most of New England, is prone to split ticketing. They will, there are people that voted for Biden, Shaheen, Sununu, and a Republican state senator or state assemblyman or the equivalent of the lower house in New Hampshire. And I certainly think we're going to see that factor play out in 2022, which is one of the reasons why, even though New Hampshire went +7 Democratic in the presidential election, that doesn't really say a whole lot about the off-year elections. New Hampshire is immune to wave years, though, usually. In 2014, I think Maggie Hassan was reelected as governor of the state. Usually margins in this state tend to be relatively close. Jeanne Shaheen was kind of the exception. If we go back to the last time when Maggie Hassan won her seat back in 2016, she won it by 0.1% or around 1,000 votes. What's notable about this election is Kelly Ayotte was actually a fairly popular senator too, who is, I guess, couldn't survive the, you can't really call it a blue wave because both Hillary Clinton and Maggie Hassan won this state by under half a percentage point. But nonetheless, the top of the ticket was blue, and I guess that had down ballot effects in this Senate race, which I think is really remarkable. But Maggie Hassan, she did unseat a Republican incumbent, so that is something certainly going for her in the 2022 election. Now, what I find interesting about the polls is that when she's up against her declared opponent, she's beating him pretty handily, 52-39. That I don't imagine that really moving too much. Up against her former opponent and the senator she unseated, Kelly Ayotte, she's winning by 5. If we look at Corey Lewandowski, she's completely annihilating him. But if the one candidate that seems to beat her is incumbent Governor Chris Sununu. In one poll, he's beating her by 6, and another by 2. Naturally, the GOP's best chance at winning the seat and probably winning the Senate is by nominating Chris Sununu. Now, he is a potential. He has entertained the idea of running before, and rumor is behind the scenes he will actually eventually run, which is really going to make this Senate seat very competitive come next November. But Maggie Hassan against a generic opponent, she actually loses by a lot. Now, again, these are all just single polls. These 2 polls against Chris Sununu, though, are the only ones we have, and she's losing in both. I would still imagine this would be a very close race, even though Chris Sununu won as governor overwhelmingly. You have to keep in mind that incumbents in 2020, given the national circumstances, were heavily favored to win re-election. I don't think there was a single incumbent governor that actually lost re-election in 2020. I'm like 99% sure. And that's probably one of the reasons. If we look at, of course, a generic Democrat and a generic Republican, Democrats are favored, which makes sense. New Hampshire is sort of a lean Democratic state, even though it's a swing state. Democrats tend to do better than Republicans, similar to the rest of New England, except New Hampshire is actually competitive, whereas states like Vermont and Massachusetts, Maine to a lesser extent, aren't really as competitive. Democrats tend to always win. The governor's races, though, well, maybe not Maine, but we'll specifically focus on states like Massachusetts. New Hampshire is the exception, though. It certainly is a competitive state. But Chris Sununu is a strong opponent. He won back in 2018 by around 7 points against his opponent, Molly Kelly, when running for re-election as governor, which again just shows you his strength. While Democrats were able to maintain both New Hampshire House seats by comfortable margins, Chris Sununu remains undefeated, statewide at least. He certainly is able to outperform other Republicans. If we look at the state Senate and the state House races, I don't know if all the state Senate seats were actually up this election, but it looks like they were. The state House as well, both going to Democrats. In fact, Democrats winning the state House by over 70 seats, which is a really tremendous margin. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the state house was Republican in 2016. But nonetheless, it just goes to show you that even when Democrats do well, Chris Sununu has the ability to overperform in the state. He does much better in cities and urban areas, Manchester, Concord, areas like this. Of course, 2020, if we look at that map, he basically wins every municipality in the entire state by pretty large margins. There's a few rural precincts and areas here and there that he does not win, but he still does fairly well, except in Hanover, which I guess is where Dan Feltus is from or something like that, given its high margin. But this race is crucial because given a number of circumstances, it could really determine the balance of power in the Senate. If this seat were to flip red, let's say hypothetically, Chris Sununu wins, and a state like Wisconsin stays in Republican hands, Republicans would only need to win either Pennsylvania, Georgia, or Arizona, and they would have a majority in the Senate. Kamala would not be the tiebreaker. Now, technically, Nevada could be toss-up, but I'm still having it as lean Democrat for now, considering there's no solid opponent against Catherine Cortez Masto yet, so it's not really... it's going to be difficult to determine. Nevada is one of those states that's trending more Republican very slowly, but it certainly is going to be a very close race nonetheless. Now, if Arizona predictably stays in Mark Kelly's camp and Georgia stays in Raphael Warnock's camp, then it really all comes down to Pennsylvania and, again, New Hampshire. If Republicans were to win Pennsylvania, hold on to that state, but they were to lose New Hampshire, let's say all the incumbent senators end up winning their races, we still get exactly where we started, a 50-50 tie. Now, I'm not really sure which of these scenarios is more likely, as we're more than a year and a half away, which I guess it's fun to speculate these things now, with not really a whole lot happening in electoral politics. But New Hampshire is going to be one of those key races, and if Chris Sununu does officially run for this seat, which I think is actually very likely, Democrats are going to be having to put money into more states than they otherwise previously would have. had Maggie Hassan run against a generic Republican, they probably would put a small amount of money into the state, but ultimately not a significant sum. Whereas with Chris Sununu, you have a very competitive Republican, very likely challenger. Of course, I wouldn't say he's necessarily favored, although the polls say that as of right now. He certainly is the most formidable opponent against Maggie Hassan. It will certainly be one of those nail biters. Now, Republicans in the Senate do have a somewhat difficult map in the sense that they need to defend Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. North Carolina is not going to be as difficult for them, but they also need to pick up seats, obviously, if they're going to take back the Senate. And without Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, their map becomes very tough, because if Jean Shaheen, Maggie Hassan, does run for re-election, let's just say she wins by a lean margin or whatever, Republicans are effectively barred out. I think states like Georgia are more out of the question with them, both demographically and the trends that we're seeing among the suburbs and just the urban-rural divide in Georgia. The state has become so urbanized in the northwestern part around Atlanta that I think it poses a serious problem for Republicans, even in an off year, which really only leaves them with Arizona. And a lot of the opponents they're putting up against Mark Kelly right now aren't that impressive, to say the least, in terms of electability. Again, we'll have to see who wins the primary to actually get a sense of who is up against Mark Kelly or these other races. But the essence of this all is that if the Republicans cannot win New Hampshire, their pathway to the Senate becomes a lot more difficult. Not impossible, but just more difficult. Obviously, if they have Chris Sununu running, that's a state that they're going to have in their category. So obviously, it's in Democrats' best interest to have Chris Sununu not run for that seat, as they're more likely to keep the Senate as a whole. But right now, Chris Sununu is not running yet. I would give Maggie Hassan the advantage. Again, if we look at the polling, generic opponent does very well, but generic Republican does not in the polling. In fact, loses by 8 points. So it seems that the voters of New Hampshire want her replaced, but not necessarily with just some ordinary Republican. Chris Sununu is not some ordinary Republican, so if he runs, this race is going to be super duper competitive. I would say right now this is a lean Democrat race just because he's not officially in the race. Obviously, if Sununu jumps in, it moves straight into the complete toss-up category. But the Granite State is certainly going to be a state we're going to be watching come Election Day next year. Well, anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up under this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with your friends. As always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.